It's tabletop time, and I'm Dave.
Gazog exemplified the conniving mindset of the cruel boys.
Oh, hello. I'm just reading The War at Amberstone Watch. It is the little booklet that came with my box of Dominion. And I'm going to be painting the Stormcast Eternals today. I'm doing it. Over the next 3 days, I'm doing it, in fact. I'll be painting my Stormcast to a pretty decent tabletop standard, getting them ready for a battle report with Jazza. He's only got 1 day to paint his models, so I'm trying to kind of make them look pretty impressive. Although batch painting 20 Stormcast Eternals is going to be, well, not my favorite part of the hobby, but hey, the final touches and the end result are totally going to be worth it, I'm sure. I do love the Stormcast Eternals. They've completely redesigned them since the previous iterations, and my only complaint with these amazing new models is that they look so good, it makes me not want to field the rest of my Stormcast Eternals army because the proportions are completely different. I'm really excited to start building effectively what I'm almost looking at like a new army because, well, let's face it, they almost look like a different army. But it's going to be really cool to do that. The first thing that I need to do is put together the models, and that includes Yndrasta, the Celestial Spear, a very cool angel model that I'm quite excited to make. Without further talking, let's just dive into the build. Well, 20 Stormcast Eternals in all their multi-piece glory. Pressing these models together was, as I briefly discussed in our Dominion unboxing video, well, not my favorite part of the hobby, but they go together well. I'm not gonna lie, as usual, they're pretty good kits, pretty easy to put together. I'm just not so good with hours on end of sticking these tiny fiddly pieces together. It's not my favorite part of the hobby, but you have to get through it to get to the painting. One thing I find that I can never, ever resist when modeling is customizing. It doesn't matter what it is, I always want to make little tiny parts of it my own. And with this box, one of the things that's always struck me as odd in games like Age of Sigmar is that you can add items into the squad, such as banners or musical instruments, and these are equipped onto models that do not lose their weapon attacks. It makes sense mechanically from a rules perspective, but it doesn't make sense when you look at the model. In the case of these Stormcast Eternals, 1 per 5 can take a banner, but they don't lose any attacks with their spears. So what I wanted to do was to make sure that their spears were also banners, and then it makes perfect sense. The banners are just attached to the spear poles. So I snipped the top off the banners and added some of the spare spear tips from the box. So now it's pretty clear that all of them are equipped with spears, and some of them also have banners. Only one model out of the Dominion box is built to hold the banner, so I also chopped and changed one of the female models from a different squad into a banner bearer. And as usual, I saved the best to last to ensure that my stamina for building these kinds of things doesn't run out. And in my eyes, the best to last is Yndrasta, the Celestial Spear. I interrupt this building session for the purposes of announcing that I am about to cut the head off the coolest model in the box. I can't help myself. All the winged Stormcast in my Stormcast army have hoods on and dark, shadowy faces. It's kind of a throwback to one of my favorite games, Diablo 2, from when I was a kid. So she's got wings. So it really just seems to me that Yndrasta, off with your head.
Whoa, clear out the room, I'm coming through, they wanna see what I'm about. Yeah, I got skills, do it for the thrill, I'm on a paper route. Extra, read about it.
If you want to make these conversions, you kind of just have to go for it. I already had a head sitting aside. This head, I believe, was from the old Elven Waywatchers kit. It's one of the only Games Workshop kits that has female hooded heads. So I have a few of those Elven hooded heads sitting around, along with Deathwing Knights hooded heads. These are the two best fits for Stormcast Eternals for my hooded angel themes. I tried to stick it on pretty much immediately without any cutting or chopping, in the vain hope that I wouldn't need to green stuff it, but it looks like I do. So before the day is over, I'm going to get a little bit of green stuff to gap fill and to fix any of those small areas where it doesn't quite look like it fits correctly. This way it allows the green stuff enough time to dry before I come in tomorrow morning and get cracking painting. So the army is assembled, it's ready to go, but we're still grey plastic. The time has come to base coat. Following on from this, I had a recipe that I'd previously used on my Stormcast Eternals, which was basically the one that they outlined in the original Battle Tome. I don't know if Games Workshop is still using it, but it's certainly the one that I learned how to paint them with, which is to use a Citadel wash, which is Reikland Flesh Shade over the gold, and then use Auric Armor Gold, Liberator Gold, and Stormhost Silver to highlight. Now, I didn't have any Auric Armor, so I grabbed the Vallejo Pure Polished Gold, Dorado Pulido, and began with some dry brushes. Now, I used makeup brushes for this. With such a large surface area on models, it's the fastest way to do it, and I like using makeup brushes instead of dry brushes, especially for the big area. In hindsight, I can't believe this whole process took me so long, but only towards the end of the day that I was able to start painting the white onto my models. My Stormhost has white as its secondary color. It is an homage to my love of games like Diablo and Diablo 2, and specifically the angels in those games. This was because I wanted all my models to appear to be celestial angels that descend from the heavens to help out the mortals in the mortal realms. However, as the Stormcast range expanded and more cool models came out, I decided that I did want to include other models in the range, so I moved away from exclusively using white. Now my army includes purple as another major color, but for now, the important part was to get the white down. Now this was Wraithbone, 2 coats of Wraithbone, and it was painstaking to delicately get the Wraithbone in between all of these lightning bolts and filigree, especially on the shields, was a time-consuming process, but I knew it was ultimately one that was worth doing, and this method of painting allowed me to do all the metallics on all the models very quickly, so it's kind of a little bit of time traded more than time saved. After getting the 2 coats of Wraithbone down, I applied a very watered down wash of Seraphim Sepia to the white areas, and then I neatly tidied it back up a bit with Wraithbone before applying a final highlight of Vallejo's off-white. And now it was time for the unexpected agony that was leather straps. Oh, Stormcast Eternals, you have so many leather straps. And this was the last of the intricate fiddly parts of batch painting that I was really dreading, and I pushed through it. It took hours. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. I just used a very matte black paint to coat up those leather straps to match them with my other models in my army. When highlighting this black, I almost stippled on rough edge highlights to show the weathering and uneven wear and tear that leather often has. While this technique of line highlighting takes a lot longer than doing a traditional line highlight, it gives a much more textured appearance that can really make a simple base coat highlight for a battle-ready army look a lot more complicated and a lot better. Oh my goodness, okay, that was the hump. And we're over it. That was it. I am not ashamed of saying I'm not very good at sitting still and painting the same thing over and over and over. That batch painting vibe is my weakest link when it comes to painting an army. And I'm so stoked to be at the end of day 1 of full-on painting these models. And the white is done. The gold is done. And I can tuck into 2 days of just doing all the blissful parts. We've got the highlighting, the details, all the stuff where you start to go from the ugly stage of the model to the amazing finished product. So I'm like just super relieved right now, and just filming my super relief right now because I want to rant about how happy I am to not be doing that anymore. It's amazing. I hate that it comes off as negative, but it's a positive. Even things that we really love have stages that aren't the most fun, and that's the stage that isn't the most fun. Painting 2 thin layers to 3 thin layers of cream on a black and gold base coated area around filigree and detail is just, it's a lot, and it's done. It's done. It's done. When I'd previously painted my Stormcast, they were very close to the standard paint scheme that is on all the box art, blue and gold. However, over time, my army's identity has evolved, and this was a really good opportunity for me to change a few more things. One of the things I'd painted consistently was their weapons were silver with a blue glaze and then silver highlights. However, I thought this was a really good opportunity to include more of the twilight purple in my army. At the studio, we have this awesome set of scale color metallic paints, and I grabbed Amethyst Alchemy, which is a purple tinted silver, and I began painting all the components that would have once been silver with a blue tint on my army as silver with a purple tint. The first step was of course base coating in Amethyst Alchemy. The next step was to apply a very careful directed shade into the top parts of the scale armor and the recesses of the weapons using a purple shade. That will add a bit of depth. And then it was time to re-highlight up with silver to reinforce the idea that this was in fact a tinted metal rather than being a purple matte finish or satin finish. It's meant to be reflecting the light, so we wanted to come up to a very bright highlight. It was at this step, doing the silver highlights, that I also went back through all the gold armor on the models and applied the silver highlights to them as well. I just noticed something really cool. There's left-handed people in this squad. So these are the two models I noticed, and I noticed that almost all the Stormcasts have their daggers on their right hip, but there's one sculpt that has their dagger on their left hip, which is super cool. So to paint the purple elements on my models, this included the cloaks, but it also included the grips of the weapon. I started with a deep purple, choosing not to use a wash, as the way washes dry on cloaks, I'm often not satisfied with. It can leave very patchy, large splotches where the wash is dried on a flat area, that also don't really follow where the natural shades would fall. So I chose to just start with a very, very dark purple and build my way up. To do this, I blended several layers of purples up to a mid-tone, and then ultimately a highlight, glazing back across the blends to smoothen it out. I wanted to try a new technique. This technique was cross-hatch highlighting. Now, this is the sort of technique I would only use to build texture on battle-ready or tabletop models. That's personal preference. But what it did is allow me to build texture on these fabric elements very, very quickly while also highlighting them. And overall, for a first time, I'm really happy with the effect and the attempt. I think it adds so much texture to that robe and makes it look like a cloth element as separate from the other elements of the model. The last step on my robe is my customary star field. The stars have always represented the celestial element of the Stormcast Eternals to me. Originally, when they first came out, my initial concept for my Storm host was that they would be deeply connected to Dracothian, the Star Drake. As the years went by and the true dragons in the Stormcast Eternals never really got fleshed out and never really got expanded, I was left wondering what to do with it. I still like this connection to Dracothian, the celestial Star Drake, but either way, it suits as a representation of the Twilight Realm, the celestial plane, or many other things, and overall I think just adds a little bit of wonder and fantasy to these models. There are a few small rope elements on just a handful of characters, which I painted with terracotta paints highlighting up to a soft cream and washing back with sepia to blend them. This was important so that they didn't pull the eye too much from the model, and it became, rather than a clashing color that distracted, but just another color that blended into the model while still breaking up the golden elements. Several of my Stormcast Eternals had exposed heads. This was new to me. When I initially started my Stormcast army, I wanted them to all be avatars of lightning encased in suits of armor, because that's kind of the vibe I got 5 or 6 years ago when Age of Sigmar dropped. I never thought there were people in those suits. But as diversity has improved across the range, and they've become, well, let's face it, more interesting than looking at the block-headed, samey faces of Space Marines. So this eventually led me to deciding that I would basically accept that the Stormcast Eternals look like people now, and I'd start painting some without helmets. It was a really cool way to explore painting different skin tones, which is something I haven't had the opportunity to do enough of. And I absolutely adore that about Stormcast Eternals. It's honestly one of my favorite things about the lore. The idea of this Valhalla style place where heroes of every background from every culture in the mortal realms all get pulled into this crazy melting pot, unified over their amazing successes and glories as champions. You can have a blacksmith from one town who defends their town with a champion warlord from another, an amazing strategist from an ordered city. There's just so many options. There are also a couple of banners in the set, which I painted to match the army's color scheme, using the creams and the purples. I added a new color, which would be a non-metallic metal gold. I don't like using metallic paints on fabrics because in reality, especially in those settings, metals typically aren't paints. They're either metal or not metal, and it's pretty hard to make a flag out of steel. So, yeah. Alright, so there it is, a marathon week of painting. It's been massive, but it's been amazing. It's had its highs, it's had its lows, it's been a huge challenge, but at the end of the day, I'm super happy with my army. I'd say this is probably the first box set that I've finished in a while. All the models just inspired me to complete them, and I was happy that after a week, that was it. I was done. I got them all finished. I'm super stoked. It was huge. It was a big effort, but we got there in the end. I'd like to... Gareth, where are you going? What are you looking at over there? All right. You got me. You busted me. Here she is. Yndrasta. But fret not, for I am going to be painting her in a manner that befits such an awesome model. I'm going to take a full dive on this, doing a proper showcase paint job, which will be really exciting. There's two reasons for this. One of them is that I simply ran out of time. But the other one is that the box actually comes with 300 points, roughly more Stormcast Eternals than it does Orcs. So for me to play with Jazza in a fair one-on-one match, I needed to lose 300 points. And it just so happened that I wanted to paint this and take my time with it. So we're setting Yndrasta aside for now, but rest assured we'll come back to her later. I hope you've enjoyed watching my journey painting most of Dominion. I'll admit, you might spot there's one or two little things I ran out of time for, tiny details, one or two heads that need to be painted, but I'll be doing that over the weekend. Unfortunately, time has run out, but thank you for sticking with me in the journey, and I hope you'll look forward to the basing video coming very soon, as you see my Twilight Sentinels take their home in the realm of Ulkaish. Thank you, patrons. All that stuff. Maybe it's already been happening, I don't know. This ending's just rambling and going on and on. I imagine at some point the editor took the patrons and began sliding them down. Began putting little buttons that say things like and subscribe and all those things. Yeah, I think something like that did happen.
Wow, we're surprising ya!
Ah, yeah. You are. Hey, there's a vlog cam.
We're vlogging!
Camera in camera, look at that.
How was our timing?
It was a little late.
We'll fix that in the edit.